Blog Talk Radio.
We are the UR Tennis Network. Our mission is to be the voice of tennis. We enlist a team of passionate enthusiasts to promote our sport. We strive to bring interesting perspectives on the many spins of tennis. Our goal is to provide the learners of our sport with current news and information from many angles. We seek active participation from communities interested in tennis, but tennis is not interested in them. We are expanding our outreach. Tennis is a true lifetime sport that needs to be talked about, and the UR Tennis Network pledges to pursue this idea relentlessly.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Parenting Aces radio show on Blog Talk Radio's UR Tennis Network. I'm your host, Lisa Stone, coming at you live from my desk back in Marietta, Georgia. My view is not quite what it was for last week's show where I was sitting out on the deck at the Malibu Racket Club. But it's nice to be back home and settled in a little bit. We actually flew back in yesterday afternoon, and my poor son had to get up and go to school this morning, so back to reality very, very quickly. But anyway, it was a great week in Los Angeles. We had lots of really fun experiences, and I'll be writing about them either today or tomorrow as soon as I can wrap my head around it all and put pen to paper. But for today, I have with us on the air Marc Lucero, who is a coach out in Southern California. He is with Ramp Tennis, and he is a high-performance coach. He's been on the show before, and we've talked all things junior development, player development, and today we're going to continue that conversation. For those of you who had an opportunity to listen to last week's podcast with Tim Mayotte, you have a little bit of a feel for what's going on in junior tennis, but we have a real opportunity right now. Patrick McEnroe stepped down as head of player development, and USTA has yet to hire his replacement. And I'm hoping that by having these conversations on Parenting Aces and elsewhere, that we can really raise the awareness about what some of the ideas are for where player development needs to go. We can generate good conversation that leads to buy-in from all of us parents who are the customers of this part of USTA, this player development area of USTA. And, I think that by hashing out some different ideas on what player development should look like and where it needs to go and how the resources need to be allocated, that it's really, like I said before, a great opportunity for USTA to take this and turn it into a real positive for the organization and for U.S. tennis. So let me bring Marc on the line and we'll jump right in. Marc, thank you so much for being with us today.
Good morning, Lisa. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to come on your show again.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you, and I know you have some very firm ideas of what you'd like to see happen with junior tennis in this country, and so I'm excited to just kind of jump right in. As I mentioned in the intro, with Tim last week, we discussed his ideas of what he'd like to see player development look like, and as far as I know, USTA has not released any kind of a short list of who they're looking at to take over player development. I don't know if you've heard differently, but let's start out with just a really general question, and that is, what would you like to see player development look like moving forward?
It's a big question to start the show. I think I think it's really important that that player development has a very clear mission and a very clear vision. Obviously, like the vision is dictated sort of in part, by the person who's going to take over the general manager job, and also, needs to have buy-in from the USTA board of directors, obviously, who support it. I think having a clear vision and having a clear sort of plan and being able to articulate that plan in order to get the buy-in that you talked about from not just from the national coaching staff, but from the general public and the players and the parents who make up the majority of obviously the constituency for the USTA, it's absolutely just crucial that there's this buy-in, because what happens is we all want the same thing. We all want more American players, and in the top 100, in the top 50, and competing for Grand Slams. More American players playing high-level college tennis. But what kind of ends up happening is that I feel like there's so much infighting within just American tennis in general, and a lot of finger pointing, just because the vision not necessarily is articulated very clearly, and there hasn't been a lot of buy-in, especially in the last couple of years, just because there have been so many things that have led to a lot of either mistrust or just issues that kind of angered the population, just from so many different things, from like the national tournament schedule to different strategies, I guess, that the player development has kind of gone through. So it's going to take someone with a really clear vision, like I said, and someone who can sort of establish a culture from the top down, and be able to put this thing in place across the country. Obviously, the size of the country is a real challenge to do so, especially with multiple training centers, and then obviously, the network of regional training centers. But being able to sort of have this philosophy and sort of establish a culture and establish it from the top down in order to kind of trickle down to all levels and all clubs, I think that's sort of extremely important. That's just a very, very broad sketch and very probably vague, but I think those are some of the crucial issues that that kind of need to be sort of the boxes that need to be ticked off moving forward.
Right. And one of the issues that I've seen just in the short time I've been involved with all this is there seems to be a blame game going on from all levels. So, it's the players' fault. We're producing lazy kids. It's the parents' fault. We're too permissive and we get involved too much and we don't let the coaches do their job. It's the coaches' fault. They don't have the education and training they need. It's USTA's fault. They're, not on the ground and they're making decisions from their ivory tower that impact the people that are out there doing the work. So, to me, all of those have validity. I don't think we can say, that those things are not true in a broad way, but I also feel like enough already. Let's stop casting blame and let's fix this. And it seems to me that people like you, people like Tim Mayotte, people like Wayne Bryan, people like Craig Signorelli, there are a lot of people out there with the knowledge and the experience and the willingness to speak out, that we should be able to come up with something pretty amazing here.
Yeah, and we have so many resources in this country, which is, it's absolutely, it's incredible, and it's also, it's a burden at the same time, because, if we have these resources, we should be able to, to deploy them and really help the kids that we think have a chance to be good players. And it's going to take, like I said, it's going to take someone with a vision and a strategy in order to, to engage these. We have so many really strong coaches kind of spread out throughout the country who have a history of developing players, and we have so many former top players who, I think could give back in a very productive way also. And I think it's just, it's going to, like I said, it's going to take someone with a really new vision to try to engage all these resources we have and focus them in a productive way. It's really incredible, like, because I think I'm a young coach, and I think about some of the people that have influenced me, and we just have so many resources that it's a shame that that they're not used in a more efficient way. Right.
Well, one of the things that Tim Mayotte has kind of gotten behind is this whole idea of a coaches university, and he talked about that in a little more depth last week. I don't know if you've had a chance to read some of his writing about that, but to me it makes so much sense to kind of rein in these resources that we have, bring them all together in one place, and open them up to people who are interested in learning and becoming the best coaches they can be. And I feel like one mistake that we've made in player development is just simply trying to copy what another federation or country is doing without understanding what went into that. And so, for example, just trying to coach the Spanish way. Well, coaching the Spanish way involves training the coaches extensively before they're allowed to be on a court with a player. And we haven't incorporated that element of it. What are your thoughts about the training that the coaches are getting in this country, and how?
Yeah, I have quite a few thoughts on that. One, like I said, for all we have, there's a ton of great coaches out there, and there's also, there's a lot of coaches that haven't received the training, that you kind of talk about, and that's a whole other set of issues that relates to the to the certifying organizations, and also to the clubs that hire coaches who aren't certified, or who hire coaches just that were very good players and looking to do something else. And I was the same way. Like, I at one point, when I quit law school, what I needed something to do, so I started coaching, just because I could, because I was a good, I was a decent player at some point. And then obviously it took years and years, to really learn different things. And I was fortunate, like I said, to come, across some great, people who mentored me and taught me different things. But I think Tim's idea, I don't know the specifics of it, but as far as I understand, like, to have a more rigorous process for certifying and training coaches, I think it's great. And if you compare it to different countries, like in France, obviously the process to become a certified coach is quite intensive, and they have a lot of great coaches in France, and they end up producing players who are very technically pretty good. As far as the Spanish stuff, related to the USTA, the Spanish philosophy, I think the biggest challenge was that there are, 3 national centers spread out around the country, and when you sort of articulate something that you want to see happen, and it's like, at least if I told you, this is the way that, you do this, and then maybe I see you in 2 weeks, and you tell me that you really tried your hardest to do what I said, and then I go there and I see it wasn't quite exactly how it should be done. You know what I mean? I think that's the challenge, we face as a huge country, is that just the sort of day-to-day supervision, it's not realistic. I think, like, I think I had a very clear understanding of the way we were going to train players, and my day-to-day sort of practice plans and that sort of thing. Obviously, it's sort of melding the philosophy that we were going to have as far as coaching, and then obviously based on each unique player's game style. I thought I had a very clear idea of that, but I know that other coaches maybe had their own interpretation that maybe wasn't quite in line with the way it should have been.
Mm-hmm. Well, to me, it sounds as though you're kind of saying the same thing, in that there's this lack of accountability with the coaches, and the intent is good. I think everybody agrees that it's important for coaches especially who are going to be working with high performance kids, that they be well trained, that they have certain basic skill sets and the ability to build on those. But there's really nobody looking over their shoulder to make sure they're doing the things that we say we want them to do. And because the country's so big, it presents a huge challenge. And do you have any thoughts on how maybe we can address that and remedy it?
I think one thing, obviously, like we already talked about, would be more intensive training, and sort of maybe more, I don't know if there can be some incentive, or more, maybe more recognition of the coaches who teach, who teach kids really good fundamentals, and, who do more of the teaching versus the coaching, who do more of the initial work, sort of, they're the grade school teachers versus the college professors. If there was a way to recognize these coaches more, or if there was a way to, I don't know I know years and years ago they had national coaches who were kind of responsible for each part of the country, and they were supposed to be more sort of engaged, on a ground level. If there was a way to sort of, have something like that, and maybe just be more in touch, so the coaches had more feedback more often, but then again, people always get touchy when you have, national coaches come in and give them feedback. I don't know. Like you said, that the geography is a really big problem. But I think better training, and maybe if there was more of a like a prestige to really teaching kids well at a young age, I think that would sort of incentivize people to maybe want to do that versus the guy who wants to come in and teach the 14-year-olds who are starting to play tournaments.
Right.
That's or who are the tournament players versus the young kids, like the rookies. It's really tough because obviously if you come to a club and you start teaching kids who are playing tournaments, you're probably going to get more lessons because you're the kid you started coaching as playing tournaments and making the semis of the sectional tournament or whatever. Parents are going to want to have their kid learn from you versus the guy who's doing the hard work with the 8-year-olds who are trying to learn how to keep the racket head up on the forehand. So.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, USTA, right before Patrick stepped down, announced this Team USA initiative, and they held a webinar, which I posted, explaining what the initiative was and all of that. And it sounded like from the webinar that the goal was to do exactly what you're saying, was, to really engage the local coaches, to make all of the resources at the training centers available to any coach and any player that had the interest and the potential
right.
to benefit from it. And I'm wondering, what's going to happen with Team USA? And that question came up in the press conference when they announced Patrick stepping down. And the party line is, of course, this is a great initiative and we're going to keep it going. But the reality may be very different. And I get the feeling that USTA doesn't really know where it's heading right now with player development and is really struggling. And that's why I'd like to see us keep these conversations going, throwing ideas out, and, hopefully the powers that be at USTA are paying attention and, learning from people like you, people like Tim, people like Craig that have taken the time to put some real thought into this and, talk about where we need to head and what we can do to do things better. So, I mean, you work with these kids every day. You work with high-performance kids, but you also work with kids new to the game, right?
Right, right.
Yeah, so I mean, what are you seeing out there? I mean, are the kids lazy? Is that argument, does it hold any water, or is it the parents' fault? I mean, are we too permissive? Are we letting our kids slack off and get away with stuff? What's going on?
Wow. I come from the school of thought that if we have a bad practice, it's my fault as a coach 9 times out of 10. If I'm not racking my brain trying to make something out of this practice, regardless of what the player brings to the table. If the player, is having a terrible day at school and, they come to the court, distracted, or if their, whatever, boyfriend broke up with them, or, the mom got mad at them and, yelled at them the whole car ride, I can still figure out a way to get something out of this player. Or if they're playing terrible, I need to figure out a way to make this a good practice. And a good practice doesn't mean them playing well. A good practice means, we got better that day. The player got better that day. So, it goes back to, if the player is lazy, it's because I'm letting them get away with it. So I take the responsibility for that. And if we have lazy players, well, we shouldn't have lazy players because, like I said, that means we're letting them get away with it. To a certain point. I mean, sometimes, the players have habits from a young age that you just, if you get them at 17 or 18, you can't, it's tough to change. But I think, it's a whole variety of things. I mean, I don't think the kids are, any more lazy here than they are in France or England or Australia or any other first world country. I do think the kids can get entitled, for sure, if, we start treating them a certain way and, they get racket and clothes contracts at, 14, 15 and, they start getting too many things for free. I think it's important to kind of keep them in check or keep them grounded. But I think it goes back to, the people that the player surrounds themselves with, like the parents and the coaches. And if we can do a good job sort of grounding them and keeping them in their place and not sort of changing the way that we relate to them based on, wins or losses or, wild cards or, like I said, clothes or rackets, then I think we can, continue to have players who are reasonably well adjusted and, end up, having a decent chance. But I think we need to take the responsibility for these kids, because the kids will do what we let them get away with, I think. So if we sort of hold them, to a high standard and keep them accountable, then we can figure out how to get the best out of them. And it's very important that we kind of do this from a young age, and that's what we try to do with our young players, and so that by the time they become teenagers, and if they are sort of having these results, it's a way to kind of keep it going versus get kids who think they're just going to keep winning because they won at 12 years old.
Right. Where does college fit in to the whole picture? I mean, where do you see the college tennis scene playing into all of this?
Well, with the age in the top 100 and the top 10, it keeps sort of pushing north. I think like Mark Kovacs had a great stat the other day, I think on Twitter, about I think the average age in the men's top 100 right now is like 27, almost 28 years old. And same thing in the women. There are a couple younger girls who have broken through in the top 100 this year, but it's still the age in the top 10 is still probably in the late mid to late 20s. There's time to go to college, and there's obviously a lot to be said for being able to go to school and have a stable training environment, on a daily basis, and to be able to go to play futures in the fall with your team or with with one of the coaches, and and then obviously if you're in college and if you think you have a chance to play pro tennis, you're gonna that means you're probably a decent player and you're gonna have a pretty good sort of win-loss ratio in college, versus going out to play futures at 18 and 19 years old and you're playing men, and maybe your win-loss ratio isn't very good and you're losing confidence, and maybe you're not getting enough matches, your match count is not where it should be. It's tough to sort of take those blows for a few years, and obviously it's not even to mention the financial investment it takes to travel the world from 18 to maybe you start breaking through at 21, 22, 23. That's it's a lot of money versus you could be in college and having your training subsidized and not making the same sort of financial investment, and then you can still play it in the summers and maybe have a head start in your ranking by the time you graduate or by the time you think you're ready to turn pro, without the financial investment, without the mental sort of beat down that it takes. I think college is a very valuable step in the development process. Obviously, there are some kids who are ready to go at 17, but this is kind of these are the very, very rare players.
Right.
So, especially again the men. The women maybe a little bit different story, but especially on the men's side.
Sure. What do you see as USTA's role in the college pathway? Do you feel like USTA should be, promoting that? Do you feel like they should be involved in, for example, this year we're seeing, format changes yet again in college tennis, scoring changes. Should USTA be speaking out about that? And is that, should that be part of player development, or does that belong elsewhere? How do you see that all working together?
Right. Well, the USTA is a huge organization with a bunch of different arms, and just from a player development point of view, they're going to continue to encourage players to make the decision that's appropriate for where they are when it comes time to make that decision as far as turning pro or going to school. And obviously in the last few years, you've seen players who have gone to school and then come out of school ready to hit the ground running. On the men's tour, particularly like guys like Brad Klon and Stevie Johnson. And these guys have received a lot of support from the USTA, like while they were in school and also upon graduation from player development. And same thing for some of the women, like Mallory Burdett came out of school and got into the top 100 pretty quickly. And Nicole Gibbs just broke into the top 100 this week, and Nicole's received a ton of help from the USTA probably from the age of 14 and also through school and then now. I think I think the days are gone when you're going to get pressure from every single kid at 17 to turn pro, regardless if they're ready or not. Like those days are long gone. And obviously, now there's a national coach that's kind of dedicated strictly to college tennis, which is a huge step. that kind of shows the commitment they're willing to make, to supporting college tennis as a pathway. As far as the scoring changes and stuff, like this is not something that I think is coming from anyone on the competitive side. It's coming, from a different sort of arm that has to do with, getting these match days promoted, and also I think trying to, for lack of a better word, try to make, college tennis something that's going to stick around hopefully in a couple of years. I mean, I this is just sort of my guess as to where it's coming from. I have no, kind of inside knowledge about why. I mean, I do agree, like, just from a spectator's point of view, I think it's tough to sit through a college match, just because they're so long. For me, the doubles is the most exciting part. Watching the doubles point sort of come to a conclusion is really fun. And then there's kind of a downer when they take the break and they start the singles and you're in singles first sets. Like, then it gets exciting again about an hour and a half later when the singles matches get close. I think it's a real tricky thing. And the way that college sports is changing as a whole is really, it's kind of a scary time with, these events, like football and basketball becoming more and more professional, and even schools sort of threatening to break away from the NCAA at some point and form their own independent leagues. If this becomes the case, I don't. It's scary to think what could happen at these schools that don't have football and basketball, and that aren't able to play, to pay these players like stipends. I just think that the landscape can change dramatically in the next 5-10 years of college athletics, and I don't know where tennis is going to be. Hopefully it'll be fine, but it's really sort of, again, scary what to think what might happen with Olympic sports, particularly on the men's side.
Right, but in your mind, you see college as being valuable.
Absolutely.
For the majority of these kids.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think anyone disagrees with that.
Well,
maybe
yeah.
It's not always articulated, but I think college is very necessary. Like if you're a guy and you're senior in high school and you're ranked 1,200 in the world, ATP, maybe you have a couple points. Like, you have no business thinking that you should turn pro. You know what I mean? You need to go to school. I think it's very, very clear on who's ready to turn pro and who's not. And I think anyone that thinks otherwise, unless whatever, it's your dream and you have no interest in going to school whatsoever, and you have money behind you, then do whatever you want. But if you're trying to think what's the best decision for your tennis, I think it's very clear that 99% of these players need to go to school.
It's funny, we were having this conversation the other day. I don't know if you saw, but my son had this incredible opportunity on Saturday to be Mike Bryan's hitting partner, and
cool.
It was awesome. And then to go back to Mike's house and play music with him and Wayne. My son was on the drums, Mike was on rhythm guitar, Wayne was on the bass, and it was an unbelievable experience. I think my son's still on cloud 9 from that. But anyway, we went to grab lunch after all of that, and we were talking about this young crop of players and who were at the U.S. Open this year, and then the players that had the opportunity to play in that really cool collegiate event that USTA put on during the Open this year. And to hear Wayne and Mike kind of go down the list, oh yeah, this one, has a shot, this one has no shot, what is this one thinking, and I'm not going to name any names, but it, from an outsider's point of view, and being the parent of a kid who, will probably try his hand on the Futures Tour just to say he did it, but
sure.
Really has no delusions of grandeur that way. It was an interesting conversation to listen in on, and to hear the things that they looked at and based their opinions on. And, we always hear you have to be over 6 feet now, and, tennis players are growing on the men's side, and, if you're under 6 feet, you don't have a shot, and there are just all these different factors. And so for you as a high-performance coach, how do you look at a kid and make an informed decision to help guide the family on the pathway that child should be on? And, what are the specifics you're looking at?
As far as, like, the pathway to pro tennis?
Well, not necessarily pro tennis. Whatever pathway you deem appropriate for that player, what are you looking at to determine which pathway is right for them?
I think it's important to know the player's goals. The girls that I work with who are full-time here, who are, homeschooled, I have two of them, and they both, it's very clear that they want to be pro tennis players. And so that makes my job easy, because now, I know that the standard I need to hold them accountable to is the standard of pro tennis, which is great, because, it's something I know well, and it's kind of my general standard when I, look at all kids, but especially for these two, I'm able to sort of figure out, okay, for them to be successful, like, I think, okay, maybe one's 14, one's 15, and I think about, in a couple of years when they're trying to sort of make it, what type of player do they need to be? And, one's going to be tall, one's going to be short. Okay, the short one is pretty quick. Okay, she's going to need to move really well. She's going to need, what do the short players on tour do well? They move well. They take away time really well. They don't miss many balls. They're really, really tough competitors. So this player, I need to sort of make sure that she plays along those lines. Obviously, like, she does some things that are, unique to her. Like, she has a great forehand. Maybe the backhand isn't so good, so we're going to really, really develop the forehand, because that hopefully will be one of her weapons. And I'm going to make her more, more crafty than she is now, so that, she needs to realize when she's 18 playing against, someone who's like Kvitova, who's 6 feet, like, my girl's not going to be able to knock Kvitova off the baseline on the first ball, because Kvitova's, going to have 6 inches on her and 30 pounds. So this girl's going to need to sort of be able to change the pace and push Kvitova back initially, to sort of change the, who's controlling the rally. So I think about, kind of all these things, like, how is this player going to make an impact? How is this player going to take control of points? What do they need to do? The other one's a lefty. Okay, so we're going to need to make some left-handed patterns and make sure she has a really good, slider serve. And okay, she's slow, so we're going to need to, shift her game so she attacks girls through the court and doesn't open up the court for too much running, initially, until she's in control of the point. So, I kind of think about every player's unique sort of skill set that they might bring right now, and then I think about how it might translate down the line, and I look at what the players on the tour are doing and how these girls are going to be able to use their games to be effective against players like that when they're, when the time comes. And it makes my job also easier, because any time that the level isn't up to where I think it is, like, I ask them what their goals are, and then I say, this isn't what pro players do, or this isn't what good players do. If they're messing around or if they're missing too much, and then it snaps back the focus instantly. So, if players want to be, if players want to play pro tennis, like, these are the things and these are the standards that they could kind of look at. I think in the girls it's a little bit easier, because you have a sort of a wider range of physicalities. On the men's side, on the men, these guys are just so big now. Like, like, I walk around the tournaments and I'm 6'1", like, I feel small, because these guys are just getting so tall, and you have to be able to hurt guys. You have to be able to hold serve with with very little drama. You need to obviously be able to. The thing about these guys that are getting so big is they can move, and they can defend, which is incredible, because big guys didn't used to be able to really move that well or defend that well, but these guys can defend really well. They can move. They can, hurt you. Obviously, if you leave a ball sitting in the middle of the court, it's really the level of tennis on the men's tour right now. I think it's so high, especially like at the top end. It's so good. So it's really tough up there.
Shoot, even at the futures that I watched on Friday, I mean, there was some mediocre tennis being played out there, but gosh, there was some high-level tennis going on. And, these are guys that are struggling to make a living out there. And, it just boggles the mind what it takes to really break into that top 100 and stay there, And
the thing about those guys is these guys hit the ball big and they don't miss. And
right.
If you watch, like, I took one of the girls to a 10,000 in Mexico a couple weeks ago, and she we were watching some of the men play, and it was actually the first tournament I had been to since Wimbledon. I think, because this was before the Open. Yeah, it was the first time I'd been to since Wimbledon, and I've one of the things that kind of showed me that I've been doing a good job with this girl is we were watching a couple of the men practice, a couple seeds, and she said to me, she's like, these guys miss like so much, and so much is relative because these guys don't miss that much, but they were missing more than when she watches Sam Corey practice, and they're just missing more than Sam misses with when he hits with Stevie Johnson. So if I could tell any coach out there, like what do the top players do that the other players don't do, is these guys don't miss, and these guys don't miss, and they hit pretty aggressive balls, but they also know when to back off and and just make balls to stay in the point. So that's one of the really big differences, I guess, out there that I see.
So let's say you have a 12-year-old who comes to you and tells you, he wants to turn pro. And you look at him, and I'm using a boy just because I have one, but
sure.
You can
use
this girl. But and you look at him play, and you think, maybe, maybe not, but maybe. So at what point do you change the way you work with that child, or alter the training pattern so that the kid is on the appropriate path? Maybe you recognize, by age 13, there's no way this kid's going to make it as a professional player, but he can really make an impact on the college tennis scene. So let's gear our training toward that and see what happens. I mean, how does that work from the coaching side, and then how do you communicate that to the player and to the parents?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one because at 12 years old, I think every kid says, I want to be a pro. So I think it's okay, cool, like great, you want to be a pro, awesome. I think the goal, if a 12-year-old kid tells me I want to be a pro, I don't know how seriously I take it. I just say, okay, this kid wants to be good, perfect, and I can see in their work habits, really how serious they are about it. And with any kid like that age who wants to be a decent player, I look at kind of the fundamentals, like look at the grips and the swings, and I think about what things will be limiting factors later on, meaning is the grip so far underneath the racket that they're going to have a hard time catching up with the ball when guys hit the ball harder, like there's a swing going around the head, again, that's going to, the swing too big, that's going to make it hard for them when guys hit the ball harder, sort of things like that. And then we can kind of make appropriate changes so that the kid has a chance. Like, it's all about giving them a chance, I think, because, especially with the boys, like, you have no idea, like, what puberty is going to be like for them. You have no idea, like, if they're going to have other interests, obviously at 12, 13 years old. So I just kind of continue working and try to, give them as good of a base as I can. Hopefully the base is in place by then, but, obviously there's probably still, work to be done. And then we try to just see how good we can make them. And then, as they start, I think with the boys, as they start getting into high school, you have a little bit better idea. I mean, unless, some kids just delusional, and, but I think at that age, like, tell them what your goals are. Okay, great. And then, we try our hardest, and the kids' sort of work reflects, like I said, how serious they are. And then, later on, I think it becomes obvious to the kid at some point, what sort of the vision is going to be. But at no point, I think, would I ever, like, have a kid and say, like, especially a boy, and say, like, or at least articulate to them that our goal is that they're turning pro at 17, unless, the kid is 15 years old and the guy's, dominating 18s, like, at the sectional level, at the national level, making an impact at, at 15 and playing internationally. And then, then at that point we have an idea that, we're going to have to make a tough decision in a year or 2 years about, which direction to go. But at 12, 13, I think, you just keep going and try to see how good you can make them. And, I think, you expose them to different things, expose them to, the local futures, like, just to go watch, and expose them to some college matches just to go watch. And then, I think they kind of almost set their own path from there.
Have you ever had a situation where, let's say the kid's 15, and
right,
the kids come to you and said, I want to go pro. the parents have said, we support this, we think our kid's got what it takes, and, whatever you need to do to get them there. And you look at them and say, no way. There's no way this is going to work out. This kid does not have whatever the X factor is to get them there. How do you handle that? How do you handle that with the kid? How do you handle that with the family? And this is where I was just going to say, this is where I see the player development challenge is, because player development has historically cherry-picked, for lack of a better term, kids so young. And when these kids fail to show results by a certain age, they're just kind of tossed aside. And I've heard stories of this. I don't have any direct experience, but I've heard from parents whose children have been part of that and been kind of tossed aside. It's devastating. So how do you manage something like that? Because not every kid that you think is going to be great turns out to be great.
Right. I have never worked with anybody that I guess, told me they were wanting to turn pro and were going to turn pro that I didn't think should turn pro. I have told parents that their kids should go to college, like maybe someone that I wasn't coaching, but they asked me for my feedback, and I have told them they should go to college, and they're like, well, that's not what we want to do. So I've kind of been there. I've also, I've been a part of a player-coach relationship where it really came down to the wire on if this girl was going to turn pro or go to school, and basically like every tournament had the potential to sort of change that decision because, the results were so closely linked to, where she was going to go in the next, month or so. So I've kind of been in that situation that actually, we went through that a couple times. But it's a really difficult decision. When you're that close to, when you're that close, and the decision can go either way. It's really, it's really tough, and it's a family decision. As far as the USTA, with the junior players, they did coach the junior players for a few years, and they don't really coach very many kids anymore. They have a couple of boys in Boca, and then there's a couple of girls here in Carson and a couple in New York, but there aren't really many kids that they're coaching, and there was some attrition in the when they were coaching more kids in the beginning, and it's definitely not easy, and I think a lot of people will kind of go back and say that wasn't really handled the right way, it's not easy, and it's the same thing that happened that happens in college tennis. At least in my experience, like recruiting at Princeton, I would recruit players and try to get them in, and then admissions would say, hey, the kid didn't get in, but guess what, we're not going to tell them, you have to tell them. And so we'd have to make this phone call like, hey, sorry for putting your faith in us, but we can't get you into school. And it was like one of the worst parts of my job at that time. And so it's the decision to turn pro is it should be an easy one, basically. If it's a hard decision, then it's probably you should probably go to college.
Well, that's interesting. That's it in a nutshell, I guess. If you're wavering, then that kind of makes your decision for you.
Right.
Okay, so one of the things that I've been hearing thrown around is, what type of person does USTA need to pick to head up player development in order to get it back on its proper pathway? And there have been lots of different things thrown out there. There needs to be it needs to be a famous tennis personality. It needs to be a business person. It needs to be a management type person. Have you given any thought to that? Who as a coach you would like to see running things?
If I think about, not really that it's going to have any, influence on me or what I do, but if I think about what's, best for the organization and how it can run, I think you can go one of two ways. One would be someone who has some experience coaching in an organizational setting, either a federation, like a national federation, or even a college setting or maybe an academy. Someone who's been in a position to put a system in place and had a philosophy and a vision and establish a culture. And this can be someone, I think about guys who are at Tennis Canada, or this guy Louis Borfiga, who he worked for the French Federation, now is with Tennis Canada, was like the director of coaching there, or someone like Craig Tiley in Australia, who now he's the tournament director for Australian Open and making a ton of money, which is great. But he was obviously at Illinois, and then he was at running the player development Tennis Australia before he moved to his current job. Like I said, someone from a federation with that sort of experience, although there's no perfect federation or no perfect system. Or from the college side, I mean, who knows? Like outside the box, like someone like Peter Smith, who's done incredible things at USC, and they have a great culture there, and he's obviously developed good players. Or if you go away from that sort of organizational thing, someone who obviously the title is general manager, and someone who's managed an organization doesn't necessarily have to be tennis. Could be someone like someone who has a position similar to, like a guy who runs, the general manager for a football team or a general manager for a baseball team, someone who puts an organization together, like from coaches to players to, identifies talent, this sort of thing, and then kind of, puts coaches in position with an organizational framework to do their job. So I think you have to go one of those two ways, like someone who has experience in those areas, not necessarily, like, I don't think you need, someone who, was a world-class player but hasn't coached. I think that's that's going to be really tricky again, unless they come in with this incredible vision and a system in place for how to get things done. But like I said, I think if you go one of those two ways, like someone or even Gully ran player development at one point. Someone who has experience running an organization, I think, is really important because you need the management skills to sort of control your staff and then, put things in place and then let people do their jobs. These are sort of very crucial talents that, kind of need to be there when you work in, a hierarchy like the USTA. So someone, like I said, someone on the organizational side or someone, with the general manager, management skills who's kind of been in that sort of setting. Those are the kind of two ways I think about going about it.
So do you see player development's role as reaching its arms out and bringing people into a central location, or do you see it as kind of sprinkling the fairy dust out in, across the country with outreach and education and, opportunities for the people at player development to go out and touch the various communities around the United States? Or is it a combination of both?
Yeah, I think both. I mean, I think you need a central site, and I think it's important to bring kids in for camps, bring a bunch of kids in, so that they can sort of get that little taste, and then obviously so you can monitor them. I think the organization needs to go out and go, to the different parts of the country and engage the local coaches and engage the parents and show that they're out there. But like we talked about before, this country is so big, and it's important too to realize like the resources that player development has, as far as budget and as far as number of coaches. It has the fewest coaches and the smallest budget of all the Grand Slam nations, and so that's that obviously limits the scope of a lot of things that they're capable of doing versus like in France, obviously, which is a much smaller country, they have way more national coaches, and so these guys can be all over the country and be a lot more boots on the ground than our coaches can. So I think by continuing what they're doing with Team USA stuff and the regional training centers, like I think it's a great way to continue to sort of engender goodwill and to keep tabs on a lot of different players and to continue to work with the coaches who work with these players. I think that's important. Obviously bringing them in, like I think the USTA in the last year or two has done a great job. When they have camps of bringing the kids private coaches with them, and it's establishing that dialogue and building those relationships, because people like that, and people like to feel that that you're working together and not against them. I think that's one of the biggest things is when a national coach comes up to you and talks to you and asks your opinion on things and doesn't just tell you things, it goes a long way. And I've been on both sides of that conversation. I've been the coach, reaching out to the private coaches, and I've been the private coach, getting a call from one of the national coaches inviting my player to a camp and inviting me to come along too. So, having been on both sides of that, like I think it just, it speaks volumes to, it goes a long way and towards making me feel like I'm doing a good job with my player, and makes me obviously feel, valued and not just discarded, because I'm the private coach and they're like this big time coach. So, I give the guys who do that a lot of credit, but I think it could be done by more people, on a much larger scale.
What was interesting, going back to my day with with the Bryan family, which was unbelievable. Wayne made a point of saying that on the recent Davis Cup team, which was 6 guys, 4 who played and the 2 practice partners, 4 of those 6 players were developed in Southern California. Not by USTA, but by private coaches in Southern California. And so his point was, obviously we know how to do things pretty well here. Why do we want the Federation coming and telling us how we have to do things? Wouldn't you think USTA would be coming to observe what we're doing already so well and, learn from us and take that out into all the different communities across the country? What do you feel about that?
I see both sides to it. One, I think when his boys were coming up and even just when his boys were coming up, the USTA basically didn't develop. They didn't coach players. They were very supplemental in their coaching, and I think now it's a shift back towards that model where the players are kind of staying with the local coaches more, and then the USTA will help on trips, and then when the players are ready to turn pro, probably the best thing the USTA, the best thing they do well, the thing they're best at is helping players who are transitioning to pro tennis, because this is something that's A, it's very expensive, and B, a lot of coaches don't have experience doing. So, except for a lot of the national coaches who are either former pro players or have coached a lot at the tour level, so they're very good at this. So that's kind of what the model is shifting towards. So, anyway, going back to what Wayne said, I think it's important to see what the coaches who have developed players have done. But I also think that the game has changed, and the way that players are developed has probably changed a little bit also. I think it's a little, his kind of statement is a little misleading. Like, Sam Querrey started working at the USTA probably at 17 or 18, and was almost full time with the USTA from that point on. Like from when it came time to turn pro and then break into the top 100. And there's no coach out there who's developed a player, maybe unless you're Wayne, who's a parent. Like, there's no coach out there who's taken a kid from their first ball to pro tennis. Like, not the USTA, not Nick Bollettieri, not nobody, unless you're a parent and basically had control the whole time, which is sort of debatable. But I think I think it's very important that we go out there, and this is even me as a private coach. Like, I like to go out there and see what other coaches do. Like, I told Angel Lopez a month ago in San Diego, I want to come down and watch him run a practice. Like, I want to go over to Palos Verdes and watch Robert Lansdorp do a lesson with one of my players one of these days. Like, I like to see what other coaches do, and I think tennis is filled with tennis nerds, and this goes from private coaches to national coaches to tour coaches. Like, we're all tennis nerds, and so we all like to talk tennis and see what other coaches do, and learn from whoever we can learn from. And that's one thing I think that kind of can unite all of us. And that's one thing that again, like, we all have the same goals, which is creating great players, creating more American players. So I think when we go back to this us versus them, like a Southern Cal, like, we're so great. Like, I think that's one of the things that's holding Southern Cal back as a section is this. And I sit on this junior tennis council, is we cling to these old ways of doing things. Like, we need to evolve, and we need to change, and we need to, sort of get back to where we were, but we don't get back to where we were by going back to old methods. We do it by being proactive and trying to change for the better, and, and do things that are best for our players now, and not what was best for our players, 20 years ago.
And how does the junior competition structure in this country fit into all that?
Oh man, we don't have that much time, but I think it's so complicated now. It's so complicated, and I mean, it's sort of complicated. I think the general thoughts behind it are to make it very uncomplicated, but in doing so, it just it's tough to figure out when things keep changing. And I think the general ideas, like I said, behind it are good. Trying to make competition more local, trying to remove some of the cost. I think these things are good. I think the national tournaments were too big when the draws were 256. Like, that's my opinion, especially in the older divisions. I think qualifying is fine. I think 128 is fine for the main draw. But I think you need to provide an avenue for kids who are, playing futures. I mean, I know this is only a handful of kids, but I think you need to provide an alternate way of qualifying for the tournaments, especially for hard courts and clay courts. Maybe just hard courts, but another avenue for entry other than through the section. But I think the general idea to force kids to qualify through the section is a great one, but it doesn't quite fit neatly, just because there are a lot of kids. There were a bunch of the boys, and even I don't know about the girls, but there were a bunch of the boys who were squeezed out this year, because obviously you want your best players playing in the national championship. So I think finding a better way to do this would behoove everybody.
But do you see that as part of player development's role, is figuring out how to create a junior competition structure that will feed into producing professional players, but also will feed the other pathways, college, recreational tennis, etc.?
Yeah, well, if you're talking about recreational tennis, then that doesn't really fit player development. You know what I mean? So I think you need to think about what tournament structure can we create that. I mean, if you're coming from player development, then you're thinking about how can we create the most good players. You know what I mean? The highest amount of good players possible. Because if we have good players, then some players are going to go through and play college, and if we have a lot of good college players, then some players are going to come in and be good pros. So I think you think about how can we create a tournament structure that will sort of fit this pyramid where we'll have a big base, and then where we'll have players that kind of push through to the higher and higher levels. So yeah, I think it's on player development, but it's also again, it's important to realize there's so many organizations within the USTA that are pushing for different viewpoints aside from player development. There's community tennis, which is just wants 1 million players that are going to grow the game and tune in on the weekends and watch tennis events on TV, which is great because it's really important. And if we don't have people who watch TV, then we're not going to have big TV contracts. And if we don't have TV contracts, we don't have good tournaments. And if we don't have good tournaments with a good prize money, then you have less players wanting to play pro tennis. So you have less pros and you have less college players. So it's all sort of related, but you also have so many different interests that are pushing, for their own points of view. And again, when you have, I'm gonna get crazy right here, but when you go to when you have the USTA sort of governing structure, which is volunteer based and committee based, and you have again all these different sort of competing interests on these committees, it makes it really difficult to have a really streamlined system that fits neatly into what we all think should be done for developing as many good players as possible, which is usually head-to-head competition.
Right.
And simple, simple to understand, head-to-head competition. Bringing good players to play each other as much as possible, and that theory works in principle at every level. From players who are just starting, if you have a bunch of players who are just starting playing each other, they're going to get better. And if you have a bunch of high school players playing each other, they're going to get better from playing each other and having to figure out how to win. And for every level of players, head-to-head competition, I think it works. But it's difficult to make this competitive structure for, like I said, for an entire country and something that makes everybody happy, because inevitably someone's not going to be happy.
Right. Well, I think, having these kinds of conversations like we're having today is one of the important pieces of this. If we do this in the public purview where people have input and they feel like they're part of the process, then you get buy-in, and
totally.
With that buy-in comes less dissatisfaction. I mean, there's never going to be 100% satisfaction, but if we can get less dissatisfaction, I think that's a win. And I'm hoping that more people like you and like Tim will be willing to come on and keep debating this and hashing out the details until we can all agree that we've come up with something that's pretty viable and will suit the needs of the majority of these players, and maybe USTA will listen and, we'll put something in place that we all feel good about.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, like I said, the bottom line is that everyone wants the same thing. Like, no one's out here trying to destroy tennis, or destroy American tennis, and I mean, some of these things that these guys write out there is, it's unbelievable. Like, someone's trying to ruin American tennis. No one's trying to do that. Everyone's trying to do their best and make players and work with what they have. And if we can all sort of, put aside the rhetoric and then get down to, a couple of things. Take responsibility for what we're doing, which I take responsibility for my program on a daily basis, and the coaches I work with, we work our hardest to make players, and we're not looking to anybody for help. We're going to do what we do, and I know there's a million other coaches who do that. If we do that and we work with, each other, that's one thing. Another thing, the coaches need to work together on a more local basis, working together and not be so defensive about their players. But if we all work together, work with the federation, work with the sections, there's no reason that we can't have more good American players. We have a really good opportunity right now because there's so many good girls coming up. There's so many, there's a bunch of young boys who are, between 14 and 17 that are pretty good. So there's a really cool opportunity in the next 10 years to really make an impact on the tennis scene internationally and beyond that too. So I think it should be an exciting time in the next couple of years. We'll see how the changes go, and hopefully we can all together make a difference.
That would be great. Well, thanks so much for coming on today, Mark, and sharing your point of view with us, and I hope you'd be willing to come back again as this conversation continues.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I really do. I feel like it's crucial that we hash this out in the public eye, and that people hear the different points of view and offer input. And for those of you listening, I if you have thoughts on this, shoot me an email, lisa@parentingaces.com. If you have questions for Mark, I can forward the information to him. Mark, give us the best way to reach you, through your website, or how do you?
Yeah, through the website, ramptennis.com, or I'm on Twitter @Marc Lucero, Mark with a C. All my contact information is up on our website on ramptennis.com also. So I'd love to talk tennis, like I said, and I'd love to come on anytime, and had a great time today.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks to my listeners for tuning in. We went a little bit over the hour. I apologize for that, but thanks for hanging with us, and have a great week, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you.